In this section, we're going to go through some of the Agile basics, some of the basics that we do in Flow. They overlap, and this will help you start to better understand what it is that we're trying to get to and create. We're going to look a little bit about Agile's roots. The purpose of this video, we're going to look at some culture. We're going to talk about simplicity, the Stacy diagram, Cynefin, and then also some of how we'll use Cynefin to show how Agile purists and management consultants sort of overlap in their work. And then we'll talk a little bit about flow and the basics of flow and the things that we're looking at with definitions and things like that. So there's quite a bit in this section, and we'll dive in and give you the basics with which we're working. I put in some slides here. This is the 10th annual State of Agile survey from version 1. And the primary purpose, you can download this from version 1. They've got like all of the different annual State of Agile surveys there, so you can go back and look through these yourself at your leisure. But for here, the 10th annual, which is about 3-4 years ago, I think it's 4 years ago now, about 74% of all Agile was Scrum. Scrum was 58%, Scrum XP Hybrid was another 10. If you throw in Scrumban, that's an additional 7%. It came out to 74%. And so, you know, there's different ways to present these statistics, and they were probably trying not to bunch everything together. But the reality is Scrum and Scrum combos, I won't necessarily call them hybrids because they have a different thing for hybrids, and that can be a hybrid of anything. But for those that are using Scrum directly, Scrum, Scrum XP, or Scrumban, when you're looking at those, that's 74% for the 10th annual. In the 11th annual, it was 75%, so the Scrum amount stayed at 58%, and XP Hybrid was still 10%, but the Scrumban went up to 8% this particular year. So it starts to give you a little bit of a feeling for how stable these numbers actually are. In the 12th annual, you'll notice that Scrum went down to 56%. The Scrum XP Hybrid went down to 6% from 10. Scrumban held at 8%. But still, we're talking 70%. So you're talking somewhere between 70 and 75% of all Agile methodologies is Scrum. And in the 13th annual, you'll notice that it started going back up a little bit. It had gone to 70% the year before. Now we're back up to 72%, where Scrum was 54%, Scrum XP Hybrid was 10%, and Scrumban has been holding steady at 8%, or for pretty much 3 out of those 4 years, if not 4, every year. So this is just to give you a feel for when people are talking about Agile, you'll hear people make very dogmatic statements that Scrum is not Agile and Agile is not Scrum. Well, that's partly true, but almost anywhere from 70 to 75% of Agile is Scrum. So to ignore Scrum, do so at your own peril. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there about Scrum, and there are tons of lousy Scrum implementations where somebody read the book, has no experience, they didn't bring in any coaches to help them, and they make all the rookie mistakes and beyond. So just because a person is certified to do Scrum, that doesn't necessarily mean they've actually used those skills or have used them in the real world or even have the battle scars to be able to help you actually do Scrum correctly. So training's a great place to start, but it requires coaching and mentoring along the way while the teams are working in order to actually get full value out of your investment into Scrum and Agile. Agile's not new. Sorry, it's been around for a long time. The predecessors were Lean. Lean production has been out there for decades. I was taught that 27 years ago in my MBA program, and that was 10 years after my BBA program. So Lean and theories of constraints has been around for a long time. In fact, when the Ford engineers and leaders went over to Japan to find out what Toyota was doing, the guys at Toyota took out a book, dusted it off, handed it across the table to the Ford executives, and the Ford executives asked, "Well, what's that?" And they said, "Well, this is Lean. That we followed Henry Ford's book, and it was a book written by Henry Ford on how to do serial production." And the Japanese applied statistics and just-in-time thinking, Kanban, Kaizen, all of these different concepts and ideas to that continuous improvement. And they basically took Henry Ford and put it on steroids. And so the Ford executives were somewhat embarrassed that they had in their possession the roadmap, the knowledge, they just didn't apply it. And they didn't listen to the experts of their day and ended up paying a very dramatic price for not paying attention. And so you'll also see people mentioning Lean Six Sigma, things like that. Rapid prototyping, Malcolm Baldrige Award, Quality Award. There's so much out there. So Agile, as it was applied into the software world, took many of those lean production ideas and applied it to software development, and voila, you have Agile. So I know this isn't a perfect history lesson, but it gives you an idea that Agile's not new. It's been around for a long time. Many of the tactics and techniques that we use in Agile have been around for as long as 2,500 years. If you go back to our book, Nehemiah Effect, we went back 2,500 years and found the world's oldest Agile project done in an Agile fashion. So pick up a copy of Nehemiah Effect and read it, and it will help you understand what Nehemiah did already 2,500 years ago. And he used Agile on a construction project. Okay, so to suggest that Agile only works for software isn't true. We've used Agile with construction companies, we've used Agile with manufacturers, and over and over and over again, we get the same remarkable results. So, Agile's in a way not really new. It's only new in the sense that the manifesto was put into place about 19 years ago. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. Now, as I mentioned on the very first slide, this presentation isn't intended to replace any of your regular Scrum or Agile training. This is in addition to what you've already learned from other experts in the field. These videos or slides in this video gives you additional insight how to turbocharge your own Agile work, your team, and eventually your entire organization. So if you're going to be taking one of the Agile certification courses, and I would recommend going after the PSM1 Professional Scrum Master with scrum.org. If you want to get that, it's a one-time permanent certification, and it eliminates the certification mill issues that you'll encounter with some of the other certifications where you have to continually renew, and there's all kinds of extra stuff put in that. So the purpose of this is to help you take what you've already learned and basically turbocharge it for yourself, for your teams, and your organization. And here's why. I think it was Deming that made the statement that culture eats everything for breakfast. Well, I added it eats everything for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because culture is going to make or break you. And culture encompasses everything here on the right-hand side. If you look at the definitions for culture, it's going to include vision. It's going to include mission and purpose, core values and attitudes, even strategy down to goals and objectives. And you'll notice that this is going from more abstract down to more concrete. You could move purpose up a line or even move it to the top. We could have a conversation about which is more abstract, vision or purpose. Purpose for me answers the question why. Vision is even more abstract in a way because it answers what we want to be. It has this picture in the future. And again, mission is the business that we're in. Now, core values and attitudes, as you're distilling down through these layers, however you want to sort them, this is, for me, I like this way. You can choose to use it or you can resort them however you want, but try to keep it from what you view as most abstract down to what is more concrete. And as you're looking at the core values and attitudes, what's interesting here is you can actually measure it. One of the projects or assignments on which Ted and I and even our brother Dan had worked together 25 years ago. We had a business content expert that was within the project, and I won't name him just to keep protect the innocent, and he knows who he is. And anyways, he had the poster that had the 7 values of the company with which we were working. And next to every one of the value statements were check marks, almost like what you would see on an American football helmet, where they have the little stickers every time somebody does something good. So finally, curiosity got the best of us, and Ted and I cornered Dave one day, and we asked him, "Hey, Dave, what is it about those check marks on the values that you have on the poster up there?" And he looked at us, he ran over to his door, opened the door, looked up and down the hall, closed the door, ran over, unplugged his phone, and then in a very soft whisper he said, "Yeah, every time an executive violates one of these values, I put a check mark." And guess what? There was nothing but check marks all up and down the poster. That is the functional definition of being either dysfunctional and or even toxic. Okay? And so in one sense, the culture is impacted by the leadership. It's not enough for the leadership in every one of these areas. They can't just talk the talk. They have to walk the talk. And if they don't walk the talk, people can see through that quickly. As you're moving down this list and you get the strategies, you're going to distill the tactics that you're going to use, whether it's marketing or finance or whatever, sales and so on. You're going to have strategies for all those areas in order to be able to get your products to the market to help fulfill the vision mission of the company. And ultimately, as you get down to the lowest one here with goals and objectives, those you can actually start to measure. And so just like core values and strategies can be measured, goals and objectives are even more concrete and a little bit easier to measure than, let's say, a vision or a mission statement. I love this quote from Steve Jobs. "Simplicity is the ultimate of sophistication." It's a really good quote, and it's very true. But he's not the one that really came up with the quote. We'll see that in just a second. Most of us that have been through Scrum training in the US or Agile training in the US, they'll immediately recognize this and you'll go, oh, okay, well, what's this got to do with vision? Well, in a few minutes, just bear with me, you'll see. What I wanted to point out here is that you've got unknown technology versus known technology, stable requirements versus unstable requirements, and then Dr. Stacy had put simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. And the Agilists will point out that, well, for complicated, complex, chaos, and anarchy, you would use Agile. And I've heard many Agilists say, well, you know, for simple, just use a checklist, use traditional project management, use whatever. And so it becomes, you know, when to use which methodology when you're trying to get a team or a project or a program to deliver something. Well, one of our FCPs made a brilliant observation, and that's the next slide. And basically, it's not as straightforward as you might think. And this is perhaps one of the best arguments I've ever seen for why you should use Agile everywhere, including the simple corner, okay? We ran into a project, Robert and I were working together on it, and the requirements were extremely simple. They were well known. The tech was simple and well known, but the communications had become extremely complex, and it was due to multiple internal and external partners and having to deal with them. And the goal was to choose an approach to help improve the comms and collaboration. Well, if you only did the 2 dots for the Stacy diagram, you would have said, hey, we'll just do classic traditional waterfall. And the team had really languished for about a year and weren't able to deliver. Finally, one of the IT leaders came to us and said, hey, can you help us out here? We think maybe Agile might be appropriate, even though on paper it looks like we should just be doing classic waterfall to get this done. And we looked at it and we said, okay, sure. As we peeled back the layers of the onion, Robert made the observation that, man, you know, this is really complex communication. And when I was training PMI, PMPs 10 to 12 years ago, we used to teach project management is 80% communications. Well, the reality is today it's probably 95% of everything that we would do in product development or project management is communications. If that's the case and you're running into communications that are complex, then in that case, you've just made the case for almost never, ever using classic waterfall again. The only time you would ever be able to advocate doing that is if the technology was simple and the requirements were simple and the communications were simple so that the green dot's down in the corner. My experience with even quote-unquote simple projects in most organizations, especially large organizations, is that you've got such a level of complex bureaucracy, stage gate processes sitting over the top. They create such complexity that there's no such thing as simple communication anymore. So we could get into the communications calculator. I think we touched on that in our Scrum deck. It actually might be in this deck as well. But this is really important, and this makes the case for why you would basically almost never use classic again or waterfall. And what you would want to do is make a hybrid and put in as many elements of Agile as you possibly can down into that simple corner in order to alleviate the communication blockers that you're going to get, because we know at minimum your communications are going to be complex or complicated, and it could go anywhere from that to complex to even chaos and anarchy. The Cynefin, even though it's spelled Cynefin, it's a Scottish word. Dave Snowden came up with this one about 7-8 years after Stacy did his picture. I sort of like this one because it really helps people understand. You've got simple, you're sort of going counterclockwise here. You got simple, complicated, complex, and chaos. Okay. And management consultants, their bread and butter is creating best practice or good practice, but primarily best practice. When you listen to management consultants and even executives and leaders, everybody wants best practice. They want it to be simple. They want it to be simplified. And the reality is that for each of these, as you look at them, good practice for complicated, emergent practice for complex, and novel practice for chaos, all of a sudden it makes total sense that for these 3 boxes for complicated, complex, and chaos, that you're going to basically want to use Agile and Agile methodologies. And he has disorder there in the middle. I've never heard a good explanation yet why disorder's there. I'm sure that there's probably one, and in his mind, I'm sure there's a distinction between chaos and disorder. By the way, a little humor here. If you think about it, consultants were the very first profession of any. Because if you follow the Judeo-Christian work ethic or the Judeo-Christian traditions, and you look at the creation story, it talks about the spirit of the living God hovering over the waters and that there was chaos. Well, the joke is basically, yeah, and who created the chaos? Well, that's us, the management consultants. So we're the first profession, actually. The one thing I really like about this diagram is you'll notice a little gray band there between chaos and simple. And I really like this because it's sort of like a cliff. And to me, what's amazing in many organizations is that organizations can quickly fall off the cliff from simple straight into chaos. And so this is a really good picture showing that. Now,